Hi, you're listening to the Professional Speaks podcast with me, Craig McKellar, your host. As an ex-Big Four auditor for 6 years, I now run a specialist recruitment consultancy called McKellar Consulting. Throughout this podcast, I speak to senior leaders from the professional services community, past, present and future. These leaders work in accounting and finance, audit, tax, corporate finance, consulting, legal and investments. In the comfort of their own office, I will be posing questions to our guests to gain insights from them across a variety of topics, including balancing work and life, mental health and mindset, risk-taking, and effective leadership. These insights will help us learn, be inspired, grow, and ultimately succeed in what we want to achieve in our careers. Here's what's coming up on today's episode.
Building those internal networks, that trust, that ability to operate and be truthful and be honest with each other and be transparent is so important. It's so important. And again, I think referring it back to here, it's a relatively new exec team, and James Karim, Craig Robertson, who's our Director of Football Operations, and myself, and we're all relatively new in role, in that particular type of role. But I think the alignment that we have, the honesty, the transparency that we have with each other, you're really beginning to see that reference itself in whether it's financial results, whether it's the kind of, to borrow a word I shouldn't use, but whether it's momentum in terms of how we're actually building as a football club at the moment. I think there's a lot of exciting things happening off the field. We're beginning to see the performances on the field as well. So I think there's a real good feeling around the place at the moment. But that comes from alignment. It comes from making sure that we're transparent and we're open and honest with each other.
In this episode, I'm joined by James Taylor, Chief Financial Officer at Rangers Football Club. Topics discussed include his career, which started out in professional services before an interesting path to CFO across a variety of sectors, the importance of upskilling in marketing and commerciality, building trust with senior leadership teams, and achieving Rangers' 2030 strategy. So James, for listeners and viewers who maybe don't know, you're Chief Financial Officer here at Rangers Football Club, and we're sitting in the hospitality Blue Sky Lounge looking over the pitch, which has a spectacular view, I have to say. So thanks very much for being part of the podcast.
No worries.
And how are you doing today anyway? I know it's match day, it's midweek, so there's a match tonight. Does that kind of change, maybe the atmosphere in the office, like when you come in on a match day?
Yeah, and first of all, really pleased to be part of the podcast and happy to have this conversation. I think from a match day perspective, there's a little bit more towards the end of the day in terms of having to go across and make sure that you're meeting and greeting and doing the network and associated. But on a day-to-day basis, certainly from a finance, operations, legal perspective, it's a fairly normal day. It's a little bit less hectic than last month, going through the transfer window, which I'm sure you can imagine. But I think from our perspective, we were really pleased around how that ended up for us, and obviously kind of moving forward over the next kind of 2 to 3 to 4 months, really continuing that path that we've set out from our strategic objectives on a board level and on a finance level. And every single day that we come into the office, we're aiming to make things that wee bit better. So that continues no matter if it's a match day or not.
Great. And just kind of starting off with maybe your career and finance. I know that you had a goal and a plan to get into the world of sport. So could you just talk maybe a bit more about I think the influence of kind of family to give you that maybe ambition to get into the world of sport?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was publicised at the time of my appointment. My father was David Taylor, so he was the chief executive of the SFA between 1999 and 2007. And then he was the general secretary, effectively the CEO of UEFA between 2007 and 2009. Becoming the chief executive of UEFA Events, the organisation that runs European competition, so the Europa League, the Champions League, the UEFA Euro. He became chief executive of that in 2009 through to 2014. So I was very fortunate at a young age to be exposed to elite level sport business, if you will. and to be able to see how that operated and how he interacted with those various different people that usually you would only see on the telly. So from my perspective, that kind of gave me a viewpoint in terms of what industry did I eventually want to end up into. It was a long path. It's still a continuum of learning every single day, particularly when you shift industry. You always, it takes a little bit of time just to get yourself up to speed with various different seasonalities and whatever that entails. But yeah, I think from an early age, I had a desire to move into football, to move into sport more generally, and luckily enough, I now find myself at a club like this, and as you say, looking over the pitch today, a sunny day in Glasgow, which is a nice change, and I'm looking forward to the match tonight, where hopefully we'll get a good result.
Yeah, no, and so you've got that family influence, to give you that ambition to get into the world of sport, and more specifically into football. So maybe now talking to listeners about your career, about the journey. I think you mentioned to me previously that you made some decisions kind of purposely to kind of get to a CFO role, to get to a senior role in the world of sport. Can you maybe just go through some of your career? That'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously from a finance background, so I qualified as a CA in Glasgow at Haynes Watts, as it was at the time. So that was around 2005 to 2008 in St Vincent Street, so fairly central in town. And that was great, right? I mean, it gave me an understanding in terms of the kind of building blocks, if you will, of how to operate financially in terms of advising various different companies and various different clients, and really kind of giving me that base level of knowledge. Moving on from that, I did a little bit of corporate finance work at that time as well. So perhaps while I wanted to move into sport, I've always had the opinion that being as general as you can for as long as you can is actually quite useful, and gives you that ability to hop off into a particular direction at the right time and at the right opportunity. So I took a role, the first kind of move I made, I went to BDO, and that was, my first day at BDO actually was the day when you saw everyone at Lehman Brothers walking out with their stuff, really right at the start of the financial crisis. So obviously my first thought was I'm going to be first in, first out, to borrow accounting parlance. But luckily they saw that I wanted to, or certainly had projected that I wanted to build a career and move forward with that organisation. And look, I really enjoyed it there. I made some great friends, a lot of whom I'm now beginning to catch up with now. I'm back up in Glasgow from being down south, and it was a fantastic time. Following on from that, and I actually got a phone call, and it's one of these ones that you were always told at the time, or if a recruiter's picking up the phone, or if a recruiter's trying to contact you, like, oh, there's another one. Actually, one of the best decisions I ever made was to pick up the phone and have a conversation with a recruiter who was recruiting for Barclays Capital down in London. And for me at that time, being from Glasgow with the best will in the world, do you want to work for an investment bank? What's an investment bank? Talk me through that. So
can I just ask on that? Sorry, just to interrupt it. So it wasn't that you were looking.
No.
So you got the call in and you thought, well, just have a chat, and then.
Yeah. So my name would have appeared on, when you qualify as a CA, your name appears on various different lists, and I would imagine they were working down the list and they took some time to get to Taylor. So eventually they picked up the phone and I said, do you want to come down? We're having this open day. Do you want to come down to London? And a couple of friends in London, so I thought, yeah, I can get a night out of it probably. Yeah. So I went down and listened to what they had to say, and it was an ACA, as it is down south, an ACA rotation programme. So looking at various different roles across finance, 2-year rotation programme, 1 year in one role, 1 year in another. And then at the end of that, if you're successful, then promoted and into a permanent role. So for me, I was lucky enough, went through the interview process, which was really, really interesting in terms of operating it just in a different environment and a different moving into that first step really into industry, moving away from the advisory type role to the to operating within a larger, obviously, organisation, and what that would entail. So that interview process was challenging. It was interesting, and at the end of it, I was lucky enough to be offered a role. So I was offered a role, and I was actually offered my first choice, which was to work in financial planning and analysis in the finance team that was very, very close to some of the senior individuals within Barclays Capital. So that was 2010. So at the time, you had your Bob Diamonds, your Jerry Delmessiers, your Rich Richies, Patrick Claxon was the CFO, and the exposure that I had to those individuals, the materials, the presentations, the fact that you had to try and make sense of numbers rather than just report numbers, was actually quite interesting to me. So it gave me skills that I would like to think I still use today around how do you communicate financial performance in a more kind of digestible manner, not necessarily just to finance people, but also to our chief executives of businesses that you're advising, but also to a kind of wider audience, which is where a lot of the investor relations work came in. So that was I really enjoyed that role, and actually that was the first time that I thought, you know what, there's a career in finance here there's a path in finance here that I can actually follow that I probably add up quite a lot of value to. Whereas before, there were probably a number of roles that I undertook, whether it was audit and what have you, that, look, there was people better than me at that, like 100%. And I think it's important that at times you can recognise that, and you can recognise that if that isn't a particular skill set that is suited to you, then that's okay. Like that's not a problem. So sometimes to make sure that you make that step or take that opportunity that presents itself, I think it's always important to give yourself options at any stage in your career. So I did that. That was FP&A for a year. Loved it. I really that first year in London was absolutely fantastic, and moved into a second role in product control, emerging markets product control, which is effectively dealing a lot more with the trading floor. So different skill set. You have to be able to speak to different individuals. You have to be able to take some back, frankly, on more than one occasion, when perhaps their numbers didn't agree to yours. So there was, it was challenging. It was a bit more technical in terms of the day-to-day, which again, coming back to the audit versus FP&A conversation, was probably a little closer to the audit world than the FP&A world, which was maybe not well suited to me at that time. But what I did get out of it was the opportunity to go to Singapore. So I was working in Singapore for best part of 2 to 3 months, where there was a big massive migration project from London to Singapore on a number of these books. So in terms of a life experience, absolutely fantastic. In terms of the working hours, maybe a little bit more challenging, but certainly I wouldn't swap that for the world. So that was the first couple of years there.
Thinking back to maybe your time in Singapore, it sounds amazing, like an amazing experience. What maybe some of the key things you learned from that? That's, was it building relationships with people in a place that didn't have a network, or was it something?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I think first and foremost, particularly when it's the same sort of thing, I guess, when I moved to London. So I was lucky in that when I went to Singapore, that was about 18 months after I was in London. So when I moved to London, the first thing you do is you try and build out that network. Now, again, that ACA rotation group, there was 10 to 15 people on it. So that gave you an immediate network that was helpful, absolutely. But again, coming back to sport, playing football, playing fives, playing 11s, whatever it would be, massively helps you build out that friendship group, that network group. And look, I'm still in contact with the majority of the guys I met in 2010 today. So we'll go away on a weekend together or what have you. And so there's still that relationship, and those bonds are strong because everyone's in the same position, because London tends to attract people from all over the country. So that mix, that ability, everyone's really in the same position, which is actually super useful because you get to meet different people, and the diversity that's down there is absolutely fantastic. Like, I love the city. It's one of the best cities in the world. When you move to Singapore, in terms of that, it was a shorter time frame, but the same principles broadly apply. Strong expat community there. How do you tap into that? Be open to it. Make sure that you take opportunities that present themselves, whether it's a dinner, whether it's a few drinks, whether it's going and watching, at that time the F1 was going and watching the F1. whatever it is, make sure that you're available for it, because these massive cities, whether it's London, Singapore, they can be quite lonely at times if you don't sort of push yourself out there and really kind of present yourself to others to go and make those friends, make those networks. And so that was one of the first things in terms of making sure that you had that that experience and those experiences. Second thing is around adaptability, I guess. The very different way of working, very different way of working with individuals and how the hierarchies work perhaps in that culture versus the culture that we have here in the UK. So there was absolute differences there that you have to adapt to, and you have to work with and work alongside. And I think that was interesting to me in terms of expectation levels. Like, people were expected to be in the office until 9-10 o'clock at night, and perhaps maybe that wasn't the case in the UK. So I think making sure that there's an understanding on how that kind of culture interacts with the culture you've got from where you're originally come from, I think that's super important as well. So it was a really kind of, that together with London, that kind of 2010 to 2012 period really kind of forms a worldview, I guess. So
you've gone to Singapore for those couple of months and then back to London, because you stayed there for several years, didn't you? So.
Yeah. So I was in London until the lockdown, really. So from there I moved on to within Barclays Capital, did another couple of years in the planning world in Barclays Capital, moved to Barclays Group, so working in the strategy team, strategy projects team, with a number of individuals. So Hemel Makwana, who's now very, very senior within FIS, WorldPay. So there's a number of strong people in those in that team, and I think, again, that was a good one for me to get more of a kind of broader view, but I was still operating and facing off really to various different finance teams. So coming back to the original point, how do you make these moves to move into sport? When an opportunity presents itself, I was weighing up the merits or otherwise. So when I moved to the strategy team within Barclays, I'd moved from kind of investor relations to kind of business planning, if you will. It's not a big leap to go into strategy from that standpoint. So working in a strategy team, knowing that as you kind of want to move more senior within an organisation, to understand the various different building blocks around what makes organisations successful. So that to me was important. And then an offer came from Vocalink, as it was. It was a startup, effectively a corporate startup within Vocalink. It's called Zap. It became known as Pay by Bank app. And I joined that effectively as the commercial finance partner, if you will, building the business cases, understanding the building blocks, understanding the commercials. And that role allowed me to actually speak to people outside of finance. So whether it was going to banks and building business cases with banks, whether it was going to acquirers, merchants, whoever it may be in the payment ecosystem, and building out that ability to talk commercially with other third parties. And that's not something necessarily that you had to do. I was doing a lot of reporting, a lot of analysis, a lot of here's the value add that finance can bring, but I wasn't necessarily helping to build the business. And I think that's where Vocalink PBBA helped. So I was a couple of years in there, and the MasterCard came looking.
Just on that bit, so that commercial aspect of that role, did you see that as I need to upskill in this area if I want to get into the world of sport, because there's a lot of commerciality, obviously?
Yeah.
So was that your chain of thought? Or?
Yeah, and again, like taking it back to my father's position in the SFA and in UEFA, his background initially was legal, but there was a little bit of marketing in there as well. So a bit like myself, I think he thought he was a bit of a frustrated marketeer. I think that as well at times. And the commercial and marketing angle within sport is so important. Yeah. The commercial, if you look at Rangers as a football club, the commercial performance in the last 4 or 5 years has been outstanding. And James Bisgrove, now Chief Executive, was Chief Commercial Officer through that period of time. So James has now become the Chief Exec. Karim Varani has come in as the Chief Commercial Officer at West Ham, and we're continuing that growth. And that ability to build the business, build the revenue line of the business is so important. And I didn't really have that I didn't really have wasn't involved in the negotiator, because if you're in Barclays, as I say, you're facing off to various different finance teams, whereas in Vocalink and ultimately in MasterCard as well, you're facing off in commercial negotiations. So, okay, if I give you this, what do I get in return? Blah, blah, blah. So it's the intricacies of those negotiations I wasn't part of, but I knew I needed an element of that to be able to add value in a sporting industry or in a football club in this instance. So for me, the commercial side, the marketing side was something that I needed to build out, and the marketing side became more important. So commercially, I thought, right, I'll move to Vocalink, I'll work through this. There was a little bit of M&A involved as well when we sold into MasterCard, which was useful. Useful for my previous role, but from a finance perspective, certainly at a CFO level, you want to be able to support, influence decisions around corporate structure, around any M&A activity that you feel is necessary. Less so in a sporting world, obviously, but certainly in other business lines. So that was useful for me. And at that point, I was made, when MasterCard acquired Vocalink, effectively became a finance director within MasterCard, looking after the pay-by-bank type product set. And I had a decision to make. So a company called Yo-Yo, which, if you've ever used the Cafe Nero app, they're the ones who effectively built it and built the loyalty scheme. And
bank statement a lot.
yeah, exactly. So they built the payment app and the loyalty scheme around that. And so that role came up effectively as I think it was VP of Finance at the time. And it was an opportunity to go out and do it yourself, like put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. Can you operate at that level? Can you operate a finance function at that level? So there's a question as to whether you got to take that step, because if you never take that step, then you never know, right? Yeah. And I could have fallen flat on my face, but luckily the performance was okay, and we ended up moving forward as an organisation. So 6 months into that, we had the conversation around the next round of fundraising. So at that point, we had a CEO, we had a CCO, we had a CTO, Chief Technology Officer, we had a Chief Operating Officer as well, but we had a VP of Finance. So my point to Michael, Michael's still a very close friend, my point to Michael was, well, you've got these four, like, if I'm an investor, I think you probably need a CFO as well. Now, that might be me, that might not be me. But just saying, like, if I'm looking from the outside in, I think you need a CFO. And yeah, it worked. So so I ended up, so...
There's a good lesson in that as well, you know, to have good relationships first, right, with who you're working with, to be able to have conversations like that to help your career, and not from a bad place. You know, you're being serious in what you're saying, and then that's been same light.
100%, and it's building those relationships. I think you've hit on a really good point there as well, that in every single one of these roles, the only way that you succeed, in my view, and the only way that you can continually move forward and take the opportunity to move into different roles and be successful in those processes, is by having a really, really, really strong, whether it's direct line manager, whether it's relationship with the board, whether it's relationship with the exec, peer group, one level above peer group, however it is, but building those internal networks, that trust, that ability to operate and be truthful and be honest with each other and be transparent is so important. It's so important. And again, I think, referring it back to here, it's a relatively new exec team, and James Karim, Craig Robertson, who's our Director of Football Operations, and myself, and we're all relatively new in role, in that particular type of role. But I think the alignment that we have, the honesty, the transparency that we have with each other, you're really beginning to see that reference itself in whether it's financial results, whether it's the kind of to borrow a word I shouldn't use, but whether it's momentum in terms of how we're actually building as a football club at the moment. I think there's a lot of exciting things happening off the field. We're beginning to see the performances on the field as well. So I think there's a real good feeling around the place at the moment. But that comes from alignment. It comes from making sure that we're transparent and we're open and honest with each other. And I think, again, as I move through my career to date, I think it's been very, very important that you you build that that rapport, you build those relationships, and that can support you as you go through. So to your point around Michael, so when I had that conversation, probably 6-7 months in, but we engendered that kind of trust element in terms of, look, I'll back you, I'll support you, and here's why I think you should do this, and if you've done that right, then he'll listen or she'll listen. And I think that's a really good point actually in terms of how you build those relationships internally. So that was Yo-Yo. So Yo-Yo went on, and that was interesting as we moved through sort of the challenging times into COVID. So COVID hit. We were in the process of doing an acquisition on a business, and at the same time looking to sell the wider group into a holding entity. So it was quite a complex transaction. FCA approval, the whole fun and games, and we managed to execute on that through kind of mid 2020. As we executed on that, we then had so we got to a point where the option was either to stay with the new holdco, but effectively stay as CFO of one of the kind of 3 business units, if you will, within that holdco, which would have been a little different to the step, which was step out on your own. So I think for me, the decision was then, do I want to continue there, or do I want to see if there's anything closer to home? We'd bought a house in Glasgow a year or so beforehand, and there was a role that came up at a company in Edinburgh called Zonal. So they kind of hospitality tech provider. And in terms of that, was my last move prior to Rangers. And for me, the decision there, so as I say, step out on your own, own it, be at the C level, was the kind of MO at Yo-Yo. And as I said, from a Yo-Yo perspective, one other thing I guess to mention there, why Yo-Yo? Loyalty marketing. So we touched the commercial angle on Vocalink and MasterCard. In terms of the marketing angle and really understanding that kind of, how do you deliver that kind of marketing experience, I guess, into your CV, that was a big one for me. And then Zonal is kind of combining a lot of the different elements. So there was a tech element, there was a payments element, there was obviously the exec element in terms of operating that. It was back up in Glasgow. And there was a little bit of M&A. It was a real kind of decent, large-scale business with a lot of good people in it. Been around for 40 plus years, and it was in kind of hospitality. So if you think around the various different aspects, we're sitting now in the Blue Sky Lounge Ibrox restaurant. As you said, the hospitality suite for the game. Hospitality and sport. It's not a big jump. So going from the CFO of Zonal to the CFO of Rangers in terms of the understanding of that commercial hospitality type environment, which is core to the football club and core to how we deliver for our supporters and our stakeholders, then that for me was a quite a small jump. So yeah, the role came up at Rangers, and I guess, like, when an opportunity like this comes up, then you have to throw your hat in the ring, particularly, as I say, if I've kind of built up various different angles to hopefully move into that space. And with the family background, I felt that I was probably quite a strong candidate for the role, and thankfully that proved to be the case.
Yeah. So this is just the third CFO role, is that right? And so for people that are listening that are earlier on in their career in finance and have got aspirations to be a CFO, there's lots of helpful insights that you've just shared. Some of the differences, what are some of the differences when you get to that level? You know, coming to mind would be the interaction with boards, perhaps, and you can talk about that, but other aspects as well that people should think about when they get to CFO, that they could maybe try and upskill in the moment that would help them.
Yeah, and I think, so I mentioned adaptability early on with regards to one of the experiences from Singapore, so I think that was super important. I think it's super important in any role, but particularly when you're when ultimately you're one of the key decision makers in any organisation, the responsibility kind of lies with you, yourself, chief exec, the rest of the exec team, the rest of the board, but you are the one that's ultimately responsible for the financial performance of the organisation. So for me, it's about making sure that while you take on that ownership, early on, certainly my first CFO role, certainly, the stress level goes like that, like to another level, because if you don't do what you need to do, then people's jobs are at risk, right? So that is quite a big responsibility, and that's something that certainly you don't take lightly, and I think making sure that message can get across to the rest of the business, so the communication aspect is really important. I mentioned before around building those relationships, whether it be with the exec, whether it be with the board, is really, really important, continues to be important. Something that I think here at Rangers we've got a really, really supportive board of the exec, but also of the wider football club, which is great, right? And it makes us that alignment, and gaining that support really, really it really helps us as an exec team, and helps us move the club into the right direction. So building those relationships, ensuring that communication is strong. Again, as a CFO, so the 3 different kind of governance structures, it was PEVC with Yo-Yo. So there's when am I getting my return? When am I getting my return? Do I have to put more money in? When am I getting my return? That tends to be the MO, which absolutely is understandable. In Zonal, it was a family business, so there was much more of a kind of centralisation of decision making with the family. So therefore, the relationship structure and managing those relationships and how you communicate to those individuals is slightly different, because it's not about how do I get a return in 2 years. It's about how do I build a company for 30 years. So it's a very, very different mentality and way of, which is really interesting in terms of, as a finance person, we're not looking at the short-term quick fix. We're looking at how do we build a path over time, understanding how to communicate, because you have to communicate one way with PCVE, probably more forthright, more direct. You have to make sure that you've got that rapport and that understanding with the business, with the family and the decision makers in a family business. And then at Rangers, the way that we interact with the board now is, again, that way of that culture of transparency, that culture of being open. Like, if there are any challenges that we have as a football club, or we have as a business per se outside the Rangers, if there are any challenges, let's get them on the table. Because if you get them on the table, then you can discuss them. Whereas if you're coming up through it, and you see multiple examples of it, when you have a wider finance team, or you've operated in a finance team, and maybe somebody's not wanting to break some bad news, like, that can't happen. Like, if nobody knows the problem, we can't fix the problem. So the biggest thing, certainly from my perspective, is how do you increase that transparency through the team, through the business, so that we can at least have the opportunity to make things better. And I think that, again, whether that's communication, adaptability, accountability, obviously, in terms of, as I said right at the start, it's on you. It's not on somebody else. It's not, okay, well, maybe if this person does their job, then it'll be okay. No, it's on you. And some people embrace that. Some people like that. Some people find it challenging.
The past experiences you've had probably set you up well for that culture here, in terms of openness and transparency, to talk about things. I guess that can be a big challenge in a CFO role if there's not that transparency, there's not that culture.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think from my perspective, I've been fortunate in that every role that I've operated as a CFO so far, as you say, the culture, the transparency has been strong. I've spoken to, obviously, a number of my peer group are in various different CFO roles in different businesses, and I've seen some challenges. I've seen some horror stories coming from there, and I think for me, again, it's about how do you make yourself accessible? How do you make sure that people feel that they can tell you something, because it's not the end of the world, right? We'll find a solution. And I think there are times when perhaps certainly people that maybe in businesses that either I've operated in the past or otherwise, that maybe there was a little bit of a fear factor, and you can't have that. Like you need that openness to be able to fix things.
Yeah, and of course, big difference with football club is, you know, a lot of your stakeholders are coming here on match day. So today's at match day. So, you know, if listeners hear some noise of doors banging, that's because they're getting set up for the hospitality tonight. You know, there's, I guess, a lot of openness and transparency just looking out there, isn't there, where fans, you know, whether they're unhappy or they're happy, the board, the exec team will get a good feeling for that as well.
Absolutely, and I think the interesting thing, and it's actually a really helpful thing from a football club perspective, is you get direct feedback, and you get direct feedback certainly every second Saturday, if not every Saturday. And if you look at any business, it has a series of stakeholders, right? So as it has, whether it's government, regulator, board, there's a number of different stakeholders for any organisation. In a football club, the biggest single stakeholder and most important stakeholder is the supporters. So how do we, and that's going to be a core part of our Rangers 2030 strategy, which we're just finalising out, and supporters is a key pillar of that. And for us, as a football club, as an executive team, as the board as well, we recognise that is what are we trying to do here? We're trying to create a successful winning Rangers. So if we create a successful winning Rangers and play good football in the park, then again that creates that good feeling, that creates that positive feedback, and that for me is ultimately what we're trying to achieve. So from a finance perspective, if I'm looking at the financial performance of the organisation, how can I maximise the impact that we can get to the first team, to the women's first team, to ensure that we have, as I say, the best possible team we can get on the football park on a Saturday or a Sunday or whenever the games are these days. But that for me is the why, from a exec team perspective, from a board perspective. And look, I think we're moving in the right direction on that one.
Now, a football club is, you know, it's got some obvious differences to other clubs, other companies, in terms of, you know, you've got people, players, in your P&Ls affected by the performance of them, and obviously you can't control them. You know, you can influence, but you can't control them in terms of their attitude and or if they get injured or whatever. Coming back into the finance department, though, is it? Would you say it is pretty similar to any other organisation in terms of the functions it has, or is there any slight differences?
No, I think finance as a whole is quite a transferable skill set. There's nuances, absolutely. There's things that you have to learn about particular industries. So sports, seasonality of sports. So season tickets come in, and how do we manage through the season and make sure that the working capital position is good throughout the year. I think is something that every football club, you see a lot of loans with obligations in January. Again, that's part of the reason behind that. So I think for any football club being really on top of where we are from a working capital standpoint is super important, which, to be fair, is the same in any business. I mean, one of the things that's quite interesting for me anyway as a CFO is, while you're involved in the strategic direction and delivering the strategic direction of, in this case, the football club, or in other cases, the company, cash remains king, right? That has to be something that you're always focused on, that you continue keeping an eye on every single week. And then, as you said, the supporters. So I think one of the key things in sport, but probably exacerbated at a club like this, is the loyal nature of the fan base, in that they back the team home and away. You go away to Dundee, you go away to Hibs, wherever it may be, and they fill the stand. If you go to, if you look at the game tonight, it will be a sellout tonight. European, absolutely. And I think for me that loyalty is not something that we can ever take for granted. We always need to make sure that we're providing the best possible product on the park, as I said, but equally for us as a football club, we're continuing to make that experience better for the supporters. And again, one of the investments we've recently made is the Ibrox restaurant here, Blue Sky Lounge, on a match day, and that's an investment in the experience. And I think for us, what does that match day experience look like for supporters that come here? So yes, it's about how do we deliver on the park. It's also about how do we deliver those memories for the supporters moving forward. And if we can combine those two, then I think we're in a pretty good place.
Absolutely. And just as we're approaching the end, I wanted to touch on, a new manager came in kind of quite soon after you started. That must have been kind of a first experience, going into the world of sport and maybe, your trips up to the training ground and stuff is maybe things you haven't done before. Has that been all quite enjoyable for you?
Yeah, look, I mean, harking right back to the start, I think why do you want to work in sport? So look, I'm a football fan. I've been a football fan since I could stand up. I've gone to more football games than I could count. And
even in London, you were going to.
Even in London, yeah, Brentford. So unfortunately, didn't get a good result last night, but still hopeful we'll stay up. But I think the thing for me, it's exciting. Yeah. Like if you work in an organisation like this, every day is exciting. You're dealing with elite level sport, elite level supporters, elite level players, elite level manager. And like what's not to like about that? Yeah. You come in every day. If you go to the training ground and just see how that kind of operation delivers, it's fascinating. And it's a real eye opener. You're only as good as your last result, and I think for us as a football club, making sure that we maintain the positivity that we've had in the last few weeks, the last few months is super important. The manager you referenced has come in and has done a fantastic job. And has really kind of galvanised the club and the supporter base and the players, and you're seeing that in the results. And I think for us, we want to continue that. There will likely be blips along the way, of course there will. But for us, if we can kind of continue focusing on what we want for this football club, how we want to deliver trophies and continue to kind of push forward, then look, I think the start the manager has made has been absolutely outstanding. So it's been a pleasure so far, and look, as I say, what's not to like? You come in every day and you're working in a stadium like this, and it's fascinating. So yeah, it's been not a bad journey so far.
Yeah, good start.
Yeah.
And yeah, just I like to ask my guests, thinking of the next 12 months ahead as well, are there any personal goals you have, or any professional goals you have, or a combination of the two?
Yeah, look, I think I'm still relatively new in role here, so 4 or 5 months in the organisation. I think again, while we've built that kind of, as an exec team, built that alignment, built that trust, that transparency, that momentum moving forward, I think we need to double down on that. And again, from my perspective, making sure that I can support that business growth as best I can. So probably within the next 3 or 4 months, really adding that value and making a tangible difference in terms of whether that be internal processes, whether that be delivering reporting, whether that be supporting the football department around their player trading over the summer. And player trading model is obviously something that's super important to a club like ourselves. So again, that to me is where we can really start adding a lot of value as a finance function, and it takes a wee bit of time to build these things out, but I'm pretty confident we're on the right path, and I'm pretty confident as a football club we're on the right path in terms of certainly the next few seasons, and ensuring that we can get back to being the dominant club in Scotland.
Absolutely. Great. Well, no, thanks very much for your time, James. I really appreciate it.
Likewise, appreciate that. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Professional Speaks podcast. This podcast was produced by Springwood Studio Productions. Remember, you can watch the episode recording on our YouTube channel, and if you can, please do subscribe and share with all of your friends. The more people who listen to this, the more guests we can have on to share, so that you can learn, be inspired, grow, and ultimately succeed in what you want to achieve in your career. Please also contact me if you have any feedback on this episode. I'd love to hear from you.